Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Government says it's making some wide-ranging concessions to lessen the blow of persistent power outages, high inflation and high food and fuel prices. In his budget speech yesterday, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced, among others, a tax relief to tackle the high cost of living. Let's look at how best to manage consumer finances, disposable income and creating generational wealth now. I'm joined by Hayley, Parry, a facilitator at One Life's Truth About Money. Hayley, very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. The national budget is always an opportune time for one to sort of reflect on their finances and find a way forward. Looking at what the Finance Minister had to say yesterday, what stands out for you in terms of how people can now begin to navigate finances?
Yeah, so I think it's always an interesting time, when government's taking this time to reflect on what their income is and what their expenditure is. It's always a good reminder that we need to be doing the same, right? And I think in terms of yesterday's budget, there were a lot of things that impact business, but we're trying to understand what can we do as individuals to manage our money better. And I think perhaps one of the biggest things that came through yesterday, on the positive side, was that people who were looking to kind of improve their electricity supply at home will be able to get a 15,000 Rand tax rebate for installing solar panels on their home. But the problem here is that you have to spend at least 60,000 Rand before you're going to get that 15,000 Rand tax rebate back. And I think coupled with that, understanding how much pressure most people are under at the moment when it comes to their personal finances, I was a little disappointed that we didn't have any increases in terms of the incentives around tax-free savings, for example, because I think, when you're in this position where managing money is tough enough as it is, and you're looking at having to invest in something like solar, if that's something you can afford, there was a missed opportunity there. We would have loved to see some kind of incentive, getting people, encouraging them to invest in tax-free savings so that we could look at things like generational wealth, improving the opportunity and ability for more people to retire, that kind of thing.
What about taxes, sin taxes? I mean, that announcement was made on the increases. Looking at the amounts on paper, they seem insignificant, but I suppose in the longer scheme of things, they will impact consumers.
Yeah, look, I think the Finance Minister was slightly harder on smokers than he was drinkers. Perhaps he knows we all need to have a glass of wine at the end of a load-shedding day, because a bottle of wine, the tax increase on that is only 18 cents, whereas if you're buying a box of cigarettes, you're looking at an additional Rand. Cigars, you're looking at over 5 Rand increase just in terms of the sin taxes that you're talking about. So yes, these things do add up. And I think when you're putting it within a context where a lot of people are really struggling to service their existing debt levels due to the amount that interest rates have gone up since November 2021. Add to that the increases in the fuel prices, that creates an environment where it becomes really important that we focus on the things that we can control, right? So there's a lot of these things coming. We know that we've got the increases in some taxes. We know that the interest rate cycle, increase cycle may not yet be over. There may be more pain ahead for us there. So let's focus on what we can control, right? And that comes back to where we started. This is an opportune time to remind us that we also need to be looking at our income, looking at our expenditure. Are there any areas that we can cut? Are we actually managing the money we do have to the best of our ability? This is a great opportunity to say, let me take back control, focus my area of control around the things that I have more control over. Because the reality is that government are going to, pass these kind of taxes not only this year, but going forward too.
In servicing debt levels and perhaps walking towards creating generational wealth, property is seen as one avenue. And, looking and listening to what the Finance Minister had to say yesterday and just reflecting on the times we find ourselves in terms of the expenses and, what, in essence, does it all translate to when it comes to property, perhaps buying houses, maintaining your bond and those aspects?
So I think one of the really important things to remember is that when we take on debt, there's two different types of debt, right? So there's the credit that you use that's, the debt you take on that's linked to consumption. That would maybe be your credit card, for instance, and you may be using that to buy clothes or to even go and eat out, for example. But when you get access to credit that's linked to an asset, like buying a property, that's the good kind of debt. That's the debt that we're after rather, we want asset-based debt rather than consumption. And so how that relates to the budget is that the finance minister passed a 10% increase on the transfer duty exemption. Now, what that means is that if you buy a property for 1.1 million rand or less, you won't have to pay the government any taxes for that property, which means that, it's an above inflation increase. It means that they're trying to encourage us to invest in assets, and this is the kind of thing that will ultimately build generational wealth. Now, what I'd love to see is a combination of someone using that, that gift in terms of, like, we've had that allowance increase from 1 million to 1.1 million rand, and then coupling it with some financial education. So, for example, when it comes to paying your bond, most people, when they take out a bond, that loan period is 20 years. And you know that you're going to be paying that off on a monthly basis for the next 20 years. But if you take the amount that the bank grants you for your monthly repayment on your bond and you increase it by 10% and you pay that into your bond, what you will do over the lifetime of that bond is you'll actually reduce your payment period almost by a third, by around 7 years. Right? So instead of paying off a property in 20 years, you're going to pay it off in 14. Now, if you are in a position where you can afford a repayment on a property now at the current interest rate levels, and you budget in an additional 10%, perhaps that even means buying a slightly less expensive house so that you're able to do that. When you do that and you're doing it with this wealth building mindset leading you, you actually put yourself on the front foot. This is really how you build wealth, and in particular generational wealth. Because if you can pay off a property in 14 years instead of 20, well, isn't that a wonderful way to start building assets, not only for yourself, but hopefully for generations to come too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Some sound advice there. Hayley Parry, a facilitator at One Life's Truth About Money, of course, in reaction to Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's budget, and also giving some advice.